Hello, and welcome to PoliticOly episode 37. It's November 22nd, 2020. My name is Stuart, pronouns he, him. I'm broadcasting here from Olympia, Washington, USA, which is Medicine Creek Treaty tribe territory. And today I've got four main topics to talk about. I want to talk about the housing crisis and the group Tacoma Housing Now. There was a recent action in Tacoma where some houseless folks occupied a vacant building and were subsequently evicted by the police immediately. And I want to talk about that, and I also want to talk about COVID-19 as a main focus of the show. The situation right now is pretty serious, and so it's just good to keep an eye on the data and what's going on and keep ourselves informed. So we're going to look at local and state and national and global COVID-19 trend data and talk about some related stories and so on. So comment in the comment below what your opinion is, where you think everything's going, what you're worried about, what you would like to know, anything like that, or any articles or anything like that you think I should talk about next week. And that goes for all topics, of course, as well. So and also, of course, events and fundraising campaigns, mutual aid projects, all kind of things that you might want to share. Feel free to link them to me. You can find me on Twitter. That's what's up here on the screen. Here is PoliticOly, or at OlyPolitic on Twitter, and that one is for show updates. I pretty much just post the new episodes and things like that on there. So if you just want things like that, follow OlyPolitic. And then my main Twitter account here is Oly Stewart. My current username is defundOPD for Olympia Police Department. And so you can find me on here for my main account with, if you want to get the hot takes, they're on this one. And then I also have a Twitter account. I'll just throw this one in here since I don't usually mention it. That is for science and space exploration and international science collaboration and climate change, things like that. I post about on my Oly Space Nerd account at NerdOly. So you can follow that one if you want some stuff like that. And I have been meaning to do more shows on those sort of topics, but that's coming up in the future. But anyway, take a look if you are interested. So back to today's show, though. My other two topics for today are going to be third-party politics here in the U.S. and finally international and foreign policy news. Typically I start the show with local news and sort of go out from there, but I think today I'm going to actually just start on international and foreign policy for a change of pace. So let's see, switch this over here. Whoops, not that one. That one. There we go. So this is a post just from about an hour ago from Representative Rashida Tlaib, and just wanted to start off with this. Quote, Tamir, your deep brown eyes and smile has never left my mind. You should be with us today on your birthday. I know you would have been marching with us in the streets demanding that we dismantle the racist and oppressive policies that led to your murder. We march for you, Tamir. So thank you, Representative Tlaib, for continuing to uplift the memory and the spirit of victims of state violence, and starting with that in honor of Tamir Rice. Now, I also, just real quick before we get into the first topic, want to throw in this upcoming event. And so, of course, this week is Thanksgiving weekend in the U.S. And I know a lot of folks are looking to create alternative traditions to the typical settler colonialist Thanksgiving holiday, right? And we want to celebrate family, and we want to give thanks and be grateful, and share these times with each other. And so that part of it is important. And some of our traditions we want to deliberately change or include different things than maybe we grew up with, so that so that Thanksgiving is a time that we can acknowledge colonialism and decolonization efforts, and acknowledge the tribes of the area where we live, and things like that. And so just wanted to share this. I like to go down to the State Chas down there by the Deschutes Estuary early on sunrise on Thanksgiving morning. And so some folks here in Olympia put on this annual sunrise ceremony. And so this year, of course, with the COVID pandemic, they're not calling for an in-person gathering, but it's on Zoom. So anyway, you can follow the link below and maybe start your day with a acknowledgement of the indigenous rights movement, and the indigenous heritage of the land that we're on with this sunrise ceremony. Now on to international news. I'm going to start with France, because there's been, on social media over the past 24 hours or so, we've been seeing tons of people linking things about France and talking about what's going on in France. And so I just want to touch on that a little bit. Now, one of the major issues in France right now is Islamophobia and Islamophobic bigotry and violence and policy. But that is a topic for another episode. What I just wanted to share today with you quickly is this piece about, the title of this article here, this is France24.com, by the way, /en for English. And this is a good channel. I tuned into this channel because they used to play some of it late night on Free Speech TV, I think, or something like that. But anyway, so for some good coverage of what's going on in France, France24.com/en. And this is their article, quote, "Thousands protest French security bill that would ban police images increase surveillance. And this article's from yesterday. Quote, thousands of people took to the streets in Paris and other French cities Saturday at the urging of civil liberties campaigners and journalist groups to protest a proposed security law they say would impinge on freedom of information and media rights. Pending legislation in France's parliament would create a new criminal offense for publishing images of police officers with intent to cause them harm. Officers would face a maximum penalty of up to 1 year in prison and a €45,000 or $53,000 US dollar fine. Now, I think some critics of the policy would point to the key word there being with intent to cause harm, because there's other wording in the actual bill and it's very vague. And that's what people are upset about. It's a very vague bill. I believe it's called Global Security, something like that. Anyway, and so this is just part of this global right-wing sort of authoritarian or sort of fascist type of policy that we need to pay attention to, because we may see it here as well. And of course we have seen all kinds of bills criminalizing protest across the US, and that is a current topic in many locations across our country. And of course, as I'm saying, is also a global issue. And we see that the people across the world, we can show solidarity. I was seeing posts on Twitter and so forth from folks from other country offering support and solidarity to the protesters in France. And I am certainly concerned about what we will see from the Biden administration, because on police matters, it's one of the most right-wing Democratic administrations that I can think of. And there's a history of mass incarceration policies, and even just recently, folks were dragging Biden on Twitter and other social media for calling Black Lives Matter protesters terrorists. And so it's very concerning what we may see from the Biden administration with their propensity to work with the right wing on these sorts of matters and completely ignore what the left and even progressives have to say on the matter. So keep an eye on what's going on in France, and I'll follow up on that in the future as well. And also keep an eye on that issue everywhere across the world and here in the US. Now, I wanted to share a foreign policy article here in The Nation by Representative Ilhan Omar, titled, quote, Representative Ilhan Omar, I hope President Biden seizes this opportunity. The president-elect has a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reorient U.S. foreign policy so this country truly means what it says. By Representative Ilhan Omar, and this was published 2 days ago on the 20th. And it starts with a bunch of sort of history of the damage that the Trump administration has done on foreign policy, and it's obviously horrific, and centers around profiting off of death and destruction with the military-industrial complex, arms deals with Saudi Arabia, and so on and so forth. So I'll skip some of that, but you can follow the link to read the rest of the article. And there's also quite a bit in here about Yemen and the UAE, and we will get back to that in a moment as well in a separate article. So I'll start here about halfway through Ilhan's article here. Quote, "Are these the regimes we want to be empowering? In truth, these aren't peace deals as much as they're arms sale deals to human rights abusers, and they're less about normalizing relations with Israel than they are about forming military alliances against Iran. Proxy wars between Saudi Arabia and Iran continue to rage in Yemen, Syria, and to some extent Libya, and these alliances only further align the United States and Israel with the Gulf states in these conflicts. Soon after the UAE deal went through, Trump proposed a staggering $23 billion in arms sales to the UAE, which the administration admitted was linked to the deal. I introduced resolutions this week to ban these sales. Thank you, Representative Omar." The quote continues, "And we must ask, what do these agreements mean to the millions of Palestinians who continue to live under Israeli military occupation? Rather than make statehood or self-determination more likely, they have normalized the occupation and made real peace for Israelis and Palestinians increasingly unlikely. In exchange for recognition, Israel supposedly agreed to halt its planned annexation of Palestinian land. But just this week, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo visited an illegal Israeli settlement in the occupied West Bank and ordered that imports from these settlements be labeled products of Israel, suggesting that de facto annexation will move forward apace. The autocrats in the Gulf seem to be okay with this arrangement. As former director of the U.S. Office of Israeli Human Rights Group B'Tselem, Mitchell Plitnick wrote, quote, "The motivations of the Gulf states are as clear as they are indifferent to the concerns of the Palestinians." President Biden has a tremendous opportunity to reverse this. Instead of siding with one group of dictators over another, we should position ourselves at an equal distance from both, allowing ourselves to be honest brokers, protecting our national security and interests while promoting human rights and democracy. We can hold Iran accountable for its human rights violations while also holding Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and the UAE accountable. This applies to the occupation as well. Ignoring the suffering of the Palestinians runs counter to our most basic values. Moreover, it threatens our national security. No less a figure than Trump's former defense secretary said that the United States pays a military price every day for our role in perpetuating the occupation. As I have said before, we must reinsert the call for a two-state solution with full human rights and self-determination for both Israelis and Palestinians back into the public debate with urgency. More broadly, we must recognize that keeping tens of thousands of troops in the region is a failed endeavor. When people's only interaction with the United States is through weapons sales and our military presence, they see us as an imperialist occupying force. It also sends a signal to the rest of the world that we care more about material interests like oil than we do about democracy or human rights. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reorient our foreign policy away from short-sighted military alliances and toward justice. We can create an America that means what it says when we claim to stand for human rights and democracy, an end to arms sales to dictators, an end to collective punishment of innocent civilians, and renewed support for multilateralism and accountability. I hope President Biden seizes this opportunity." End quote. And that is just very, very clear and concise foreign policy summarization there by Representative Omar. And while I don't necessarily share her optimism in the Biden administration, I do see the left of the left wing of the House of Representatives, led by Ilhan Omar and the Squad folks primarily, which of course has now doubled in size this year. But anyway, just wanted to highlight that because Ilhan Omar is clearly going to be one of, if not the leading voice on anti-imperialist foreign policy going forward, in the short term at least. And that's an excellent article. Let's see. Next, I wanted to share a piece in the Gray Zone with Aaron Mate. Aaron Mate's show Pushback on the Gray Zone. And so for some leftist, anti-imperialist, global journalistic perspective, the Gray Zone is a good source. Let's see here. I am going to switch the audio over here and just play a couple of minutes here at the beginning of this video, and then you'll have to follow the link to watch the whole thing.
Welcome to Pushback. I'm Aaron Mate. On the campaign trail, Joe Biden pledged to end U.S. support for the Saudi-U.S. war on Yemen.
And I would make it very clear, we were not going to, in fact, sell more weapons to them. We were going to, in fact, make them pay the price and make them, in fact, the pariah that they are. There's very little social redeeming value in the present government in Saudi Arabia. And I would also, as pointed out, I would end the subsidies that we have, end the sale of material to the Saudis, who they're going in and murdering children and they're murdering innocent people. And so they have to be held accountable.
If Joe Biden follows through on his campaign pledge when he becomes president, he will be ending a war that he himself helped start. It was the Obama administration, where Joe Biden served as vice president, that greenlit the Saudi invasion of Yemen in 2015, which has now caused the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Well, joining me is Shireen Al-Aldimi, assistant professor of education at Michigan State University. Her latest piece for In These Times is called Biden Must End the War He Helped Start. Shireen, welcome to Pushback.
Thanks for having me on.
What is the state of Yemen today? And talk about the road that Biden faces if he is to follow through on his pledge to end the war.
The state is the worst humanitarian crisis on earth, and I think it's difficult to understand that given that it just keeps getting worse. 80% of the population is in need of humanitarian aid just to survive. And even in the middle of all of this, there have been several aid cuts to the people who now rely almost exclusively on aid. So it's as dire as it can be. People are starving. People are dying of diseases like cholera and COVID and diphtheria. People are not having enough to eat. And of course, they're still being bombed by the Saudi-led coalition, of which the United States is part. And they are being blockaded in their own country, so they are not able to access food, medicine, or travel as freely as most people in the world do. So it's heart-wrenching. It's really difficult to imagine the kinds of decisions people have to make over there. And it's an entire country that's been undergoing this humanitarian crisis for over 5.5 years.
So follow Aaron Mate on social media and the Gray Zone for more. And that speaking was Assistant Professor Shireen Al-Aldimi, Assistant Professor at Michigan State University. So that's a good interview. You can watch the whole thing for more context on that. But basically, as Aaron framed it, the Obama administration helped start many of these conflicts around the world by working with the people that he now claims to oppose. And it remains to be seen whether this change of language and rhetoric in fact translates to change in military contracts and policy and budgeting. So yeah, I would definitely recommend following Gray Zone and Aaron Mate, who will continue to have an anti-bias perspective on foreign policy. Next, I wanted to highlight this article in Democracy Now! Titled "Trump's Multi-Pronged Attack Against Iran Ramps Up with New Sanctions, Possible Bombing Plans." And this was published on November 19th. And you can follow the link below to watch the video version. But I'll link this article version as well. So, basically the concern is that that Trump, and by Trump, really the warmongers behind the scenes in the Trump administration, right, may try to trigger some kind of international conflict or war with Iran before the transfer to the Biden administration. And this is an interview with Narges Bajogli, professor of Middle East Studies at Johns Hopkins University and author of Iran Reframed: Anxieties of Power in the Islamic Republic. Quote, "When you read that piece in the Times, Professor Bajogli, that President Trump is weighing bombing Iran before he leaves office, your response." So I found that piece to be, it raises a ton of questions for me. It was interesting because the next day after that Times report, Fox News actually reported that it wasn't Trump who requested those plans, but it was actually Robert O'Brien, his national security advisor, who requested it from his staff. So it seems to be that right now we don't actually know the full story. What we do know is that President Trump is actually the first president in decades who hasn't started a new war, and he has run on the fact that he does not. He's against these wars, these foreign interventions in the Middle East. What he's going to do in the next 2 months is unclear so far, especially given his loss and how he's responding to it for the presidential election. Further down here, they mention cyber attacks against the Iranian National Gas Company and worries in Iran that there could be further cyber attacks causing harm with regard to energy, through a cold winter in Iran and so on. So, anyway, I'll link that so you can read or listen to the full story there, but the full interview. But definitely don't, because the mainstream media, right, is not talking about these things so much. They're mostly focused on the reality show aspect of it, right, which is why the ruling class supported Trump in the first place, because he's a spectacle. And because the news and everybody is focusing on, what ridiculous thing happened today? Giuliani's hair dye is dripping down and all these things. And while that is, can be very entertaining, it's really distracting from what's going on behind the scenes. As you just heard, you've got warmongers in the Trump administration requesting plans to bomb Iran and at the very end of the Trump presidency. And whether or not Trump himself is in favor of these things is really not the question, right? Is really irrelevant, because it's not this spectacle figurehead that is in charge of such things. It's these military-industrial complex warmongers behind the scenes, right? So, anyway, no war with Iran, as I always say. So I want to end the segment there with this quote that was posted by Twitter user at Ashtar Bulos. But it's a quote from Laila Lailami, who is an author. And the quote is, "I have come to understand that there is nothing more American than forgetting the past. It is through the obliteration of memory, an obliteration perpetrated with great deliberation by the state upon the citizenry, that American identity is fashioned." And I just thought that was a beautiful summation. So the next topic I want to talk about is the housing crisis and what's going on with this group Tacoma Housing Now. So there were some tweets a couple days ago on the 20th, including this one by @photogriff, Mike Griffin, who is a photojournalist at Cairo 7 News. Quote, "Happening now, Tacoma Police Department are clearing Galt Middle School, has been vacant for 10 years, of around 10 homeless that took residence inside. No arrest that I've witnessed." And so basically what happened is some houseless folks got organized to shelter in this vacant building because the temperature was going to be in the 30s. You know, we got winter weather coming in here in the Pacific Northwest. It's rough for folks out there. And there's empty buildings, as it says in the tweet here from this journalist, that this building had been vacant for 10 years. And one thing that you may notice in the photo of the police coming to clear the homeless folks out of this building immediately, right, in force, is that the police have been doing crowd control on these protests and demonstrations for months now, and they have a real hard time wearing their masks, right? They make these policies, such as the Thurston County Sheriff and many others across the country. Is a common problem is that the police say that the mask mandates don't apply to them, right? And so some wear them, some don't, and they can't seem to be bothered, right? But when they come clear 10 houseless individuals out of a vacant building, what do you see here? They are in full hazmat. They've got gas masks, they've got hazmat shoes, gloves, everything. And so and what they were saying was that, well, they can't stay here because there is, it's an old, dirty building. There may be some contamination or something toxic here that could be harmful. But it's just, the hypocrisy is just glaring. So anyway, let's look at an article with some more information. And this one is in the Tacoma News Tribune, titled "Deaths, Unrest, Growing Encampments Make It Clear. Tacoma is Failing the Homeless" by Matt Driscoll, and this was posted yesterday, November 21st. And it gives some context to what we were just looking at, because there have been 3 deaths so far in the past few days of homeless folks in Tacoma, and I think that's actually been updated to 5 now. But and some of the context here that they're talking about is that, well, other counties have found ways to get people inside during a pandemic. Emergency sources of funding, emergency housing and hotel rooms, and things like that. Well, apparently in Tacoma and Pierce County, they just haven't really done much of that at all. And so I'll just quote here from Matt Driscoll. Instead of thinking big or outside the box, here in Tacoma we've continued to pin most of our hopes on well-meaning churches and stretched thin service providers, keeping our fingers crossed that with just a little help they'll be able to shoulder even more of a burden. Unfortunately, the results of this piecemeal plan are in, and they tell us all we need to know. It's time for the local government to step up and find a way, a different way to do more, because lives are at stake. Tragically, we've learned that the hard way this November. So that is some context, and actually I'm going to pull up the Twitter account of Tacoma Housing Now, which is the group that these houseless folks who did the occupation started on Twitter to share their experience as they dealt with the police and so forth here. So you can follow them at TAC Housing, and they say, "We are your neighbors. We want decent housing for everyone in Tacoma." And so as you can see here, they are now demanding a community land trust for that vacant building to house folks in, and they have supply requests and other updates. So follow that account for the direct source, I guess, the primary source. And this is a fundraising page. Oh, interesting. Wow, I wonder if their fundraising page got taken down. Huh. Oh, okay. Maybe my link was just wrong. Anyway, so yeah, this is a fundraiser on GoFundMe, and I'll get the correct link in the description below here for you. So support if you can, but they are about halfway to their $15,000 goal, and they want help, buying things that they need, supplies, bedding, laundry, and all these things. And I imagine probably legal representation or anything else that they may need while they, fight the police in these raids and sweeps and whatnot. Well, folks just try to get themselves out of the elements. So if you can, please give a donation. So sort of to bridge this topic with the next one, which is COVID-19, is this article, or rather, information page from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, titled "Tracking the COVID-19's Recession Effects on Food, Housing, and Employment Hardships." And I'm going to link this below because this is a big page just full of data, and I can't go through the whole thing. So take a look for yourself. But really what we can see is the data behind what we know to be true if we're, working class folks in America right now. There's difficulty getting food on a working class budget, especially if you have kids. Households with children are almost twice as likely to not have enough food to eat in this country, which is, just terribly sad and indicative of a systemic problem that we have yet to address, of course. And, of course, as we know, there are further inequalities among the inequalities, right, that interact in an intersectional way to oppress particular people in our society. As an example, black households in America have a 22% probability of having food insufficiency during the pandemic, and for white households that's only 9%, and that is even further exacerbated when you look at kids versus no kids and other inequalities as well, such as gender, of course. So, the pandemic is having an effect. We already, of course, had historic levels of inequality in our economy. And what we see in the data is that the pandemic has specifically worsened many of those inequalities. And the programs that we have seen so far from the government to address the crisis have not addressed the inequality, right? So you may hear a headline of nearly 1 in 5 renters are behind on rent during the pandemic. But again, for black households, that's 33%. 1 in 3. So, and again, those with children, 28%. And so, anyway, again, I can't go through all the data on this page, but if you're interested to see the actual data and how the pandemic has affected it, this is a good source here, from what I can see. So, this chart here is by state. So in Washington State, overall, 8% of all Washingtonians and 12% of Washingtonians with kids did not have enough food to eat in the past month. So there's the data, right? And of course, we can see that the pandemic is hitting particular populations very hard. And so houseless folks is one of those populations, and there are others as well. And so these things are, of course, all interrelated, right? And we have to address the holistic problem of inequality and the pandemic and capitalism, and the class system inherent in it. We have to address all these things in a holistic systems level way. So anyway, taking that cue to move over to COVID-19 discussion, this is something I had posted on Facebook. I said, PSA, there's still time to cancel your in-person Thanksgiving plans. And that is still true. So if you were thinking of gathering in person with your folks or friends or whoever, just there's still time to reconsider that, and I hope that you take a look at the data And because the graphs, the spike at the end of the graphs that we're seeing are scary. So anyway, so we are going to take a look at what's going on with the pandemic on a local, state, and national and global level. And I'm just going to pull up some of the data, and we can see the trends. We can see what's been going on recently, because we have this data available to us now, right, as a society, and we need to focus on what's important, and not, as I was saying earlier, with regard to the Trump news and things like that. We can't let ourselves get too distracted with the spectacles, and try to focus on the data and what the global scientific and medical community are saying, and what we can learn, and what we can do better as a society, and as a species, right? So anyway, I'm going to start with the local here, and this is a recent update shared by Olympia City Councilor Renata Rollins from a meeting that they had just been at, and I'll quote, "I just got out of a meeting of EMS providers and policymakers where it was shared that there are currently 21 patients with COVID-19 in Providence St. Pete's, and 6 of them in the ICU. These COVID numbers haven't been seen before in our area and will impact not only those individuals, their families, and medical staff, but our friends and neighbors who get injured or fall sick with other illness and may not have beds readily available because of the spike. Our hospital capacity in Thurston County is already below what we need for our growing population size, even in the best times. So this is hard news to hear. I can't imagine what it is like to have to ration care or beds. We must do all we can to flatten the curve again. Thank you, nurses and care workers." Update. A St. Pete's nurse shared the following helpful but sobering context with me as well. St. Peter's only has 42 ICU beds, and that's when they are fully staffed. Having 14% of the whole ICU capacity filled with COVID at what is clearly just the beginning of a spike in cases is really concerning. That's on top of the fact that the hospital was already frequently full, with the ER going on divert. So thank you to Renata for sharing the update from that community meeting. And I will shift over here to the Thurston County Public Health and Social Services page. And I've said, I'll just be a broken record on this. I recommend you get this page, or if you're in another county, get your local COVID-19 data health department tracking page bookmarked, and keep taking a look at it. So we are now in Thurston County. We have had 45 deaths now. We are at 2,770 cases, with 34 yesterday, or today rather. We've been seeing roughly about 50 cases added per day here in Thurston County. The percent of COVID-19 positive tests over the past week is 6.8%, which is high, right? Ideally, what that means is out of all the people that have taken the test here in Thurston County, 6.8 have been positive. And what you want to see is a very low number there, like 1% or something, right? That, because what that means is you're testing lots of people, and even though only a few of them have it, and you find out who those folks are, and you contact trace, and you can control the spread of the virus at that point, right? But when you have a percent positive that high, what's happening is that there are a lot of cases out there that you're probably not catching as the virus continues to spread in our community. And so that number is concerning. And so let's, and again, every time I bring this up, we see folks in every age group and category Um, kids under 9, teenagers, and many elders. This is a long list. So we are spiking here in Thurston County, and pay attention to that, right? As Renata mentioned in that post previously, and I think it's an important point, is that Thurston County really has a low available hospital bed capacity, even in the best of times. There can be long waits, and especially, we're in flu season, which can be an issue as well. And so it really doesn't take some kind of, massive apocalyptic situation to overwhelm our local system. We only have a few dozen beds for 270 whatever thousand people. So, well, and that was 42 beds at St. Pete's, and so there are some at Capital Med and maybe some other places, but it's really only a few dozen ICU beds here in the whole county for several 100,000 people. So you have to keep that in mind when you look at these case numbers and you say, well, out of, several 100,000 people, hopefully our medical system can be able to handle these kind of numbers, right? And the reality is that, yes, they can, but the threshold is not so high that we can be careless. We really can't. So let's see. I'm going to also share this. I'm going to mute the mic for a minute.
Hello, Thurston County. This is Dr. Demyan Abdulmalik, your health officer. I wanted to chat with all of you today because a lot has changed in the past week. Our case counts continue to rise. Today on the Governor's Risk Assessment Dashboard, there were 154.3 cases of COVID-19 per 100,000 population over the past 14 days in Thurston County. And of all the tests performed in our county, 6.4% were positive. This is the highest it's been since the pandemic began. We are not the only county experiencing these challenges. Counties around Washington state are experiencing difficulties as well. On Sunday, Governor Inslee issued new guidance designed to slow the spread of COVID-19 across the state. I want to focus on one particular part of his guidance, the guidance on personal gatherings. This is a major cause of disease transmission within Thurston County. Thanksgiving is coming up, and this is usually a time where we gather with friends and family and give thanks. This year, it's important that we celebrate a little differently. It is not recommended to gather with people who are not members of your household. I encourage all of you to use virtual means to connect instead. I know that's what I will be doing with my family this year. If you choose to gather outdoors, please limit that gathering to 5 people or less who are not household members. Remember to wear your masks and maintain 6 feet of distance at all times. As we go into winter, I anticipate that we have challenging months ahead of us, but there is hope on the horizon. There are several promising vaccines that, if found safe and effective, could turn the tide of the pandemic.
And that was Dr. Demyana Abdelmalek, who is the Thurston County Health Officer. And you can follow Thurston County on YouTube for local updates like that. So let's go to Washington State. And I find that the best source of Washington State COVID data is from the Washington Department of Health. And I will link this below. You can also just Google WADOH COVID and it'll pop right up. Or COVID data. And they have all kind of different things. I've shown this on the channel before. And they mention here, there's an update here from today, quote, due to the current increased volume of lab test results, DOH has asked several high-submitting labs to stop sending negative results for 1 week. This will allow DOH to catch up on the backlog and explore solutions to process higher volumes. As of today, we are continuing to experience a reporting delay of 1 to 2 days. The data in the dashboards are impacted by this delay. However, the dashboards are not yet impacted by the temporary pause on receiving negative lab results. So, I don't quite fully understand why a 1 week pause on sending negative results helps them resolve the issue. So I'm not going to lie, I don't fully understand that change, but that'll be interesting to follow up on. Maybe I can find a good article that explains that and share that with y'all next weekend. But anyway, here's the data dashboard though, and you can see the hotspots in the state. We have now hit 141,260 cases in Washington State thus far, with 9,765 hospitalizations and 2,619 deaths. So, and you can see the real hotspot here is down this corridor here, right, with King County and Pierce County and Snohomish. And we're just right on the edge of that here in Thurston. Our numbers are not quite as high as some of these more urban counties, but we're on the edge of them, and there's lots of travel between these cities, of course, commuting for work, and all kind of other travel between us and these neighboring more urban counties. And so what happens there is absolutely directly relevant to us as well. So there's different tabs up here. That was just the totals and the status, right? Now you can click on epidemiologic curves to see where the data is going here. And you can see this first spike here, confirmed case counts right here. And then we actually did flatten the curve a little bit with our shutdown here through May. And then it starts going up again in the summer, July. And then we flatten the curve a little bit again in September. And then here's where we're at. It's just shooting up higher than any of the previous spikes here in Washington State. And they have predicted this spike will fall as well. Let's cross our fingers on that. I hope they're right on this projection. I'm not sure what that's based on, but let's hope that is the case. You know, I think they may be looking at an optimistic take on the effects of the governor's recent proclamations. So hopefully that is the case, but really if folks do a lot of traveling and in-person gathering for the holidays, I think it's just going to keep spiking up, you know, because the R value for how many cases per infected person is continuing to climb. It's still well over 1 here, and a lot of folks who were not following the guidelines before are not going to be fazed by a new proclamation, which is basically more of the same from the governor. So very, very concerning situation here statewide as well. And that spike at the end is very similar to the one that we see in Thurston County. You can also check out here's a Twitter account you can follow called COVID-19 Tracking Project, housed at The Atlantic. And you can see updates on here, but we're moving to the national level now. But take a look at this. Weekly tests have gone up, and so drastically. We're testing many more people. Our testing capabilities have been dramatically expanded since the spring, and yet we're still seeing those high numbers of percent positives. So that's concerning. When you test so many more people, what you want to see is that percent positives go way down. And that's not what we're seeing, troublingly. Weekly cases, look at the spike on the end of this graph. Again, spiking more sharply than any of the previous waves. Nationally, same thing we're seeing locally and at the state level. Average weekly hospitalized, 21.6%. That is also a new peak high. Weekly deaths. And this one, of course, when you look at deaths, that's going to lag behind hospitalizations. So look at the end of this graph on hospitalizations, and the weekly deaths is just like a couple of weeks behind that, right? And so we will continue to see that spike as well. So follow COVID-19 Tracking Project for daily updates. And some pretty user-friendly graphs that you can find on there that you can share with folks. As we're talking about the holidays, right, is sometimes a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? If you're having a hard time explaining why you're not coming to the family Thanksgiving, maybe these graphs can be pretty helpful there, because you can just visually see, look, Mom, look, Grandma, look at the spike on the end of that graph. What we're doing is not working, and we need to be more careful, not less. And you can clearly see that in those visualizations. So for more national data, you can go to covid.cdc.gov and click on the COVID data tracker for national numbers. We are now over 12 million cases nationally total, and we are now over 255,000 American deaths, and that's a conservative estimate, right? So you can see the hot spots here nationally. That's interesting. I don't fully understand that that map pattern that we're seeing with the north central United States there being the hot spot. Interesting. I know that there are particular issues in North and South Dakota right now, especially on the tribal reservations. They already, before the pandemic, were having a real crisis in the tribal communities of the Dakotas, the Lakota nations, and others, due to lack of resources, lack of adequate food and medical access, and transportation infrastructure, and all these other interconnected problems there. And so, as we were talking about with the inequality, and the COVID situation has made these exacerbated these inequalities, and so that is particularly the case in First Nations communities across Turtle Island. And then some of these others are more conservative states that probably have not done as well with the masking guidelines and so on. So yeah, you see North Dakota and South Dakota are two of the worst here. Let's see. Before we move on, there are a couple of articles I wanted to share. This one is by Working Washington, titled, "Why Do Washington Restaurants Have So Many COVID Outbreaks?" And this article is from a couple days ago on the 20th. Quote, "Indoor dining is now prohibited and outdoor dining is limited to tables of no more than 5 people under Washington state's new COVID restriction for restaurants and bars, which took effect on Wednesday. The restaurant industry has launched an aggressive effort to lift the new restrictions, arguing that their businesses are perfectly safe and no new restrictions are necessary. That's misleading. The industry's push to remove restrictions is wildly irresponsible. Read our full statement here, and I've linked it below. Workers in the industry are definitely concerned about their own safety when it comes to indoor dining, and the available data shows they have good reason to be worried. After healthcare, the restaurant and food service industry has the highest number of COVID outbreaks in the state, according to a report from the Washington State Department of Health. The top 4 industries for Washington for COVID outbreaks are, excluding healthcare, food service and restaurants, number 1, with 143 outbreaks reported. Agriculture, number 2, with 122 outbreaks reported. Construction, number 3, with 95 outbreaks reported. And childcare, number 4, with 81 outbreaks reported. And there's data from the Department of Health. Quote, "All 4 industries are frequently characterized by low wages and economic insecurity, and workers in these industries are more likely to be people of color. That means that outbreaks in these industries are dangerous for workers, for customers, and for public health, and those outbreaks are deepening the existing racial and economic inequalities in our state. Workers in these industries have been facing heightened risk of virus exposure at work since the pandemic took hold. And with COVID cases spiking again across the state, workers and customers need policies that protect both their personal health and their public health. By law, workers in Washington state have access to paid sick leave, which they can use to stay home if they feel sick. But not everyone has enough paid sick leave to stay home and make ends meet if they're forced to quarantine." And I'll link this below as always, so you can read the rest. I'll highlight here down at the bottom, they want to hear stories. If you are a worker here in Washington State, Working Washington is an excellent group to take a look at, and they are looking for stories from workers and situations where we need worker solidarity. So you can find them at workingwa.org. So this is a story in KUOW News on NPR titled, "As Cases Skyrocket, King County Officials Warn of Potential COVID-19 Explosion Amid Holidays," by Liz Brazil, November 20th. As new statewide social distancing restrictions aimed at slowing the spread of the coronavirus take effect, local health officials say they're especially concerned with the status of the pandemic in King County. The county last week saw its highest ever number of new daily COVID-19 cases, at an average of 581 new cases every day. As of Thursday, King County reported more than 37,000 confirmed cases since the outbreak was declared in February. And it continues, as always, follow the link to read the rest of that for more of an update on the situation in Seattle and King County. But it's just more context for the need to not do these in-person holidays, right? So if you've got family or folks that you might be concerned about, say on Facebook, saying and you don't want to fight with them, but you are concerned for their safety and spreading it, and so finding these kind of sources of data that you can share factual information to counter a lot of the misinformation that's out there is important. Now, shifting our focus to the global level, you can go to covid19.who.int for the World Health Organization's global update. And you can see these graphs, not as high of a spike at the end there as the US, but still, globally, the trend is not good. And you can go to here to find more information and break that data down. And again, when folks are maybe sharing some misinformation on on Facebook or wherever about the U.S. in relation to the rest of the world, it's good to have this sort of data to be able to keep a perspective on things. So, globally, we've had 1,377,395 confirmed COVID deaths, which is a terribly sad number. And so for anyone who is trying to minimize the situation, that is really sobering, and you could compare that to any conflict that we would call a world war, right? To find numbers of fatalities like that. And so anyway, again, covid19.who.int. And you can also follow the WHO on YouTube as well. They post updates from UN meetings and things like that. So WHO is a good follow on YouTube. For a global perspective, the most recent video here is a media briefing by the United Nations Secretary General, I believe. Let's see, where does it say? But anyway, so I'm not going to play that here right now, but basically, to get a very broad, user-friendly global temperature check, right, on things, this is a good source for that. So, I guess that basically wraps up the show for today. Kind of amazed that it's over an hour and I'm still talking. But I'll just share one more real quick thing and we'll wrap up for the day, for the week. So this is titled Radical Redistribution, $5,500 for the safety of our friend and their kid. This is a fundraiser on Facebook organized by Lisa Ganser, local community activist here. And they are, for safety reasons, not naming the individual that the funds are going to, but these are legitimate community organizers who've done many legitimate fundraisers for families in the community. So, so this is a trustworthy source here. And so I'm going to just share this so that you can help this person out if you got a little extra to help someone in our community in need. So thanks to Lisa Ganser for their work organizing such fundraisers for the community. And yeah, so, and thanks to you all for tuning in. I basically the channel is continuing to just sort of plug along, and the prime time for PoliticOly as a channel, right, is going to be primary election season, right? So so stay tuned for that, because I'll be, when we get into primary season 2021, I'll be trying to do interviews with candidates and So if you have any other topics you think I should cover on the show, let me know. You can send me links at PoliticOly@gmail.com or find me on my social medias linked below. And really appreciate you all for tuning in. If you drop a like, subscribe, if you share the video, I really appreciate it. Just a small channel here, right? So every click and share helps. If you can help me get to 100 subs, I would love to hit 100 subs by the end of the year. That is my current goal, and I believe I'm at 78 right now. so yeah, so help me get to 100 subs. I really appreciate it, and I hope you all are well, and hope to see some folks at that Zoom sunrise ceremony on Thanksgiving Day, as it's called. So love, peace, and solidarity.